1. The fire came with a sound like the sky tearing apart. Alina had been asleep beside her younger brother when the first scream split the night, sharp enough to rip her from her dreams. By the time she sat up, the walls of their hut were already glowing, flames licking through the cracks like living things. Smoke rolled in thick waves, burning her eyes, stealing the air from her lungs. She reached for her brother, but a blast of heat knocked her backward as the roof beam cracked and fell between them. His name tore out of her throat once, only once, before coughing swallowed the sound. Outside, the village was chaos. Shapes ran through firelight, some human, some already shadows. The smell of burning wood mixed with something worse, something she would never forget. Alina crawled beneath the fallen beam, skin blistering as embers rained down. She tried to stand, but the ground seemed to tilt and throw her aside. A second explosion of flame burst from a neighboring hut, and the shockwave flung her into the dirt. Pain shot through her legs like lightning. When she tried to rise again, they betrayed her, folding uselessly beneath her weight. Instinct drove her more than thought. She rolled, then dragged herself forward with her arms, elbows scraping raw against the dirt. Her palms burned as if pressed to hot stone, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. The creek lay beyond the last row of huts, she knew that much. If she could reach water, she might live. If she stayed, she would burn. She moved through falling ash and sparks, the world reduced to heat, pain, and the ragged pull of breath in her chest. Somewhere nearby, someone was crying for their mother. Somewhere else, laughter rang out, cruel and wild. Alina pressed her face to the ground, teeth clenched as she crawled past bodies she couldn't bring herself to look at. Each movement felt slower than the last. Her arms shook violently, muscles screaming as they threatened to give out. A burning brand collapsed inches from her head, sending a shower of sparks across her back. She screamed then, not with words, just sound, raw and animal. Her dress caught fire at the hem. She slapped at it desperately, smothering the flames with dirt, smoke filling her mouth until she gagged and retched. The world blurred, darkness pressing in at the edges of her vision. Somehow, she reached the outer edge of the village. The heat lessened, though the smoke still clung to her like a curse. She collapsed beside a fallen fence post, chest heaving, body trembling uncontrollably. For a moment, she thought she was safe. Then her strength vanished all at once, like a cord cut clean through. Her arms refused to move. Her head dropped to the ground. Time lost meaning. She drifted in and out, aware only of cold ash against her cheek and the dull throb of pain spreading through her legs and ribs. At some point, the screams faded. The fire settled into a hungry crackle, then a distant hiss. When dawn finally crept over the horizon, it revealed a village that no longer existed, only blackened frames, collapsed roofs, and smoldering earth. Alina stirred as the morning chill sank into her burned skin. She tried to push herself up and cried out as pain ripped through her body. Her legs lay twisted beneath her, numb and useless. Panic clawed at her chest. She dragged herself forward again, slower now, leaving streaks in the ash like the marks of a wounded animal. Her throat was so dry it felt lined with knives. Every breath scraped. "Help," she whispered, though no one remained to hear it. The word barely made a sound. Her hands gave out near the edge of the ruins. She collapsed face first into the gray dust, too weak to lift her head. Tears cut clean lines through the soot on her cheeks as she stared at the ground inches. From her eyes, she thought of her mother's hands braiding her hair, of her brother's laughter, of a life that had ended in one long night. A shadow crossed the light. At first, she thought it was smoke playing tricks on her fading sight. Then the shadow sharpened, stretching long and solid across the ash. She sensed him before she saw him, the weight of a presence, quiet and watchful. With the last of her strength, she lifted her head. A man stood at the edge of the burned earth, tall and still, silhouetted against the pale morning sky. His hair fell dark against his shoulders, his face unreadable, eyes fixed on her as if measuring whether she belonged to the living or the dead. Fear flared weakly inside her, then dimmed, exhaustion smothering it. Alina's fingers twitched, scraping the ash as she tried to crawl one final time toward him. Her vision tunneled. The world tilted. "Please," she breathed, and the ashes swallowed the sound as darkness closed in. Point 2. The Apache warrior had learned to read the land the way others read faces. Smoke on the horizon meant danger, meant loss, meant someone had already failed to see what was coming. He moved through the charred earth without sound, boots sinking into warm ash, eyes tracking every broken branch, every disturbed stone. The village told its story in silence, burned frames clawing at the sky, the stench of death heavy in the air. Raiders had come hard and fast. He could see it in the way the huts had fallen, in the scattered tracks already blurring with soot. He expected to find nothing alive. Then he saw her. She lay half buried in ash near the edge of the ruins, so still he nearly mistook her for another body. But there, just barely, the rise and fall of her back. Shallow, fragile. He stopped at once, hand lowering from his weapon, instinct shifting from hunter to guardian. He crouched a few paces away, studying her the way he had studied wounded deer as a boy, knowing sudden movement could send pain or fear tearing through her. Her skin was streaked black and red, burns climbing her arms, her dress scorched and torn. One leg lay at a wrong angle, twisted beneath her. She should not have lived through the night. The spirits had held her here for a reason, he thought. When she stirred and lifted her head, their eyes met. Hers were wide, glassy with pain, yet burning with a stubborn will that made something tighten in his chest. She dragged her fingers through the ash, trying to move toward him, and the effort alone stole the last of her strength. She whispered something he did not understand, but the meaning was clear enough. He moved then, slow and deliberate, lowering himself to one knee beside her. He spoke a single word in his own tongue, easy, steady, meant to calm frightened horses and wounded children alike. She flinched at the sound of his voice, fear flashing across her face, but she did not pull away. When he reached for her, his touch was careful, hands warm and firm as he checked her breathing, the damage to her legs, the burns that would have killed her without care. She cried out when he shifted her weight, fingers clutching his sleeve with surprising strength. He let her hold on. Pain was a river she was already drowning in, he would not add to it by tearing her away. With practiced movements, he slid an arm beneath her shoulders and another beneath her knees, lifting her from the ash. Black dust fell from her hair and clothes, drifting back to the ground as if the earth were reluctant to let her go. She sagged against him, head lolling toward his chest, breath fluttering. For a moment, he thought she had slipped away. He paused, listening to the faint sound of her heart, steady enough to keep hope alive. He adjusted his grip and began to walk. The land beyond the village was quieter, untouched by fire. Each step carried them farther from death, though he did not slow until the ruins disappeared behind the trees. He avoided the main paths, moving through brush and stone, always watching, always listening. Raiders sometimes returned to scavenge what they had destroyed. He would not be caught carrying a wounded stranger if they did. She stirred as he walked, a soft sound escaping her throat. Her lashes fluttered, eyes opening just long enough to look at him again. This time, fear gave way to confusion, and then to something like relief. Her fingers tightened briefly in his shirt, as if to be sure he was real. "You live," he murmured, not expecting her to understand. The words were as much for himself as for her. By the time he reached the river, her breathing had grown uneven, her skin cold despite the morning sun. He knelt at the water's edge and laid her gently on a blanket he carried for long journeys. He cleaned the burns as best he could, jaw tight as she whimpered and shuddered beneath his hands. He splinted her leg with care, binding it securely, whispering low sounds meant to anchor her to the world. She did not wake fully again, but she did not fade. When he finished, he sat back on his heels and watched her chest rise and fall, the ash slowly washing away from her skin with the river water. The spirits had placed her in his path. Of that, he was certain. When he finally stood and lifted her once more, turning toward the long trail home, he knew his life had already changed. He had followed smoke and found ashes, but with three. She woke to the sound of water speaking to stone. For a long moment, Alina thought she was still dreaming, caught in that strange place between memory and fear where nothing made sense. The air smelled clean, not of smoke but of river and grass. When she tried to move, pain bloomed through her body in bright, blinding waves, dragging a cry from her throat. She froze, breath shallow, heart hammering. A shape shifted nearby. The warrior sat a short distance away, crouched beside a small fire, its flames low and careful, nothing like the monster that had devoured her village. He looked up at the sound she made, eyes sharp but not unkind. He did not reach for her at once. Instead, he waited, giving her space, as if he understood that waking was its own kind of battle. Fear surged, quick and hot. She pushed herself back against the blanket, fingers digging into the earth, searching for a way to flee. Her legs answered with nothing but agony. Tears blurred her vision as panic threatened to swallow her whole. He spoke then, soft, steady sounds that rolled gently through the air. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. It was the same voice she'd heard through the ashes, the one that had followed her into darkness. Her breathing slowed, inch by inch, until the world stopped spinning. She became aware of the details. Clean bandages wrapped around her arms and leg, the careful way her burns had been treated. Her dress had been replaced with a loose shirt, coarse but clean. Someone had cared enough to do this. The realization hit her harder than the pain. She swallowed, throat dry. Where? The word came out broken. He tilted his head, listening, then gestured toward the river, then to the land beyond. Safe, the motion seemed to say. Away from fire. Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears fell silently. She turned her face toward the trees, the memories crashing over her without mercy, the screams, the heat, her brother's hand slipping from hers. Her body shook as grief tore through her, raw and unstoppable. She felt it when he moved closer, though she kept her eyes closed. He did not touch her right away. He sat beside her, close enough that his presence wrapped around her like a shield. After a moment, he placed something in her hand. When she looked, she saw a small wooden charm, smooth from use, carved into the shape of a bird. For the living, he said quietly, pressing it gently into her palm. She didn't know the words, but she felt their meaning. Her fingers curled around the charm, clutching it as if it were the last solid thing in a world that had burned away. A sob broke free, then another, until she was crying in great, heaving waves. He stayed. He did not tell her to be strong. He did not leave. Days passed in fragments. Pain and sleep wove together as he carried her deeper into the land, stopping when she needed rest, feeding her water and broth, changing her bandages with patient hands. She learned his name slowly, through repetition and gesture, the sound of it becoming something familiar, something safe. He learned hers the same way, repeating it carefully until she nodded through tears. At night, the memories came hardest. She woke gasping, fingers clawing at the air, convinced the fire had returned. Each time, he was there, silent, solid, a hand resting near hers, a low sound in his chest that anchored her back to the present. The terror loosened its grip, little by little. When they finally reached his people, she was afraid again, of strange faces, unfamiliar voices. But no one touched her without permission. No one looked at her like she was broken beyond mending. An older woman cleaned her wounds with gentle hands, humming a song that spoke of endurance and return. As her body healed, so did something else. She sat by the river during the day, watching the current carry away leaves and ash, thinking of all she had lost. The grief did not vanish. It became something she carried, heavy, but no longer crushing. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted the world in gold, she found the warrior standing nearby, watching the horizon. She held out the wooden bird to him, offering it back. He shook his head. It is yours now. She closed her fingers around it once more and nodded. From the ashes of her past, she had been carried into a future she never imagined. She was not whole. She might never be the same. But she was alive, and she was no longer alone. In them, something still alive.